significant majority of all recent deadly and violent attacks on Jews in Western nations have been carried out by Islamic terrorists or Islamic attackers who hate Jews. But that's not how it's discussed. Like, after every attack like that, the response is always more or less the same from across our political and cultural elites, which is, you talk about generalized hate. You say, oh, generalized hate is awful. Generalized anti-Semitism is awful. We must be tolerant of different people and we must not look back in anger. Pure ideological obfuscation geared towards making the average listener or viewer not understand the problem, because the problem, namely that a sizable number of people with Islamic beliefs toward hate Jews and want to kill them, or roughly 1 in 6, according to this research, have sympathy with ISIS. Now, ISIS is literally a jihadist death cult that is committed to the annihilation of the West and basically the conquering of this nation. Based on this research, a reasonable number of people you pass on the street in some of these areas might have quite a bit of sympathy for that outfit. Now, that is staggering.
Okay, everyone, I'm so grateful to be joined by lawyer turned journalist Max Klinger, who's joining us down the line. He is he publishes this Substack articles that are really, really popular. So definitely check them out. And he's gained a lot of traction. I think you told me you're actually one of the rising talent of Substack in terms of popularity of Substack newsletters. So congratulations for that and for all the traction you've been getting, Max. And welcome to JTV. It's great to speak with you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's great to be on. I'm a fan, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks
so much. And just tell us briefly how you got into doing this, because this all your whole journey got kickstarted after October 7th, didn't it?
That's right. I mean, I've always been really interested in politics. I've spoken about it at length throughout the course of my career. I've written about it. I've always been obsessively thinking about it. But it was really after October 7th, I decided to devote my time to it more seriously. And so I set up the Substack and started writing regular articles on there and regular essays, just looking at a lot of the contemporary trends, which basically were highlighted by that event and the reaction to it, but also at just society more broadly. So yeah, my Substack doesn't focus only on issues around October 7th, but that definitely got me thinking I had to start writing about this more seriously, because I think the issues are too important to just let slide.
And it seems like one of the most common themes that's really drawing a lot of attention in terms of what you're writing is about the rise of Islamism or Islam. Do you make a distinction between those two words?
Jumping straight in with the very, very difficult questions.
Why not?
I do. Basically, I refer to Islamism a lot in what I write, but I do think that to some extent, it's a false binary, to the extent that obviously loads of Muslims around the world do not subscribe to an Islamist belief system, but on the other hand, many millions of them, perhaps billions of them do subscribe to a belief system which you might describe as Islamist. So to the extent
also the question is, which one is the good Muslim, the radical or the moderate?
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm pretty sure there'd be very strong feeling on both sides of that divide within the Muslim world. So I don't feel like I am necessarily equipped to decide that, I can just decide there's this clear distinction. And I think to a significant extent, many of our contemporary politicians and commentators use that term almost euphemistically, because it's kind of avoiding the difficult discussions which flow once you realize that the distinction isn't as set in stone as people like to make out. But that's certainly an issue I look at, like Islamism or political Islam, or many of the downstream consequences of the spread of Islam across the West. That's the general ballpark of what I discuss.
So I want you to talk about this particular point of, people are using these different terms and whatever to try and avoid talking about the real issue at play that exists in Britain, Europe, the West. I found that I was almost in this alternate reality after the attack on two Jews in Golders Green by this Islamic terrorist a couple of weeks ago. Was it now, like 2 weeks ago? And I remember seeing on BBC News, BBC Question Time, it's just stuck with me. This when they were having this roundtable discussion, I'm sure you saw it, where someone in the audience said, all the panel, there's all these British politicians, you're all talking about the rise of anti-Semitism and racial hatred. Where's this coming from? And the host said, what do you mean by that question? I don't know what you mean. What specific community or part? then one Green politician, Green Party politician, tried to say that, well, it's coming from everywhere, and it's all because of economic inequality. It's interesting. Like, I can't afford my gas, so therefore I want to kill Jews. Interesting. There's just nothing to do with any particular ideology or anything like that. It was fascinating, and you wrote this piece that was really caught a lot of people's attention. Who's attacking the Jews? Can you talk to us a bit about this phenomenon of just utter denial of the problem of Islamic anti-Semitism that's motivating a lot of this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I also saw that clip from that show. I couldn't bring myself to watch the whole of Question Time. That's literally just impossible for me nowadays because it's so unpalatable. But you know what you're gonna get. But yeah, that I think the Green lady you're talking about is the co-deputy head of the Greens, and the other deputy head of the Greens is Mohsin Ali, who is this I don't know what I can say. I don't want to say anything libelous, but let's just say that after October 7th, whilst it was still literally happening, whilst the events of October 7th were still underway, he posted calling those events a Hamas fight back, and also posted using the Hamas code name for the attack in Arabic, as far as I understand it. So that's what you're dealing with. You talk about the Greens. But I mean, her response, essentially what happened is someone said, where is this anti-Semitism actually coming from? The people who are actually going around stabbing Jews. And the response was literally just complete, either real or fake bafflement and an absolute refusal to discuss the obvious answer, which is not in all cases, but the significant majority of all recent deadly and violent attacks on Jews in Western nations have been carried out by Islamic terrorists or Islamic attackers who hate Jews for whatever reason. And that's so obviously a central factor when you're trying to understand what's going on and what's affecting Jews around the world. But that's not how it's discussed. After every attack like that, the response is always more or less the same from across our political and cultural elites, which is, you talk about generalized hate. You say, generalized hate is awful. Generalized anti-Semitism is awful. We must be tolerant of different people, and we must not look back in anger. That's what they say after more general jihadist attacks on just other infidels. All of which is it's very nice to say that, but it's pure ideological obfuscation geared towards making the average listener or viewer not understand the problem, because the problem, namely that a sizable number of people with Islamic beliefs toward hate Jews and want to kill them. Obviously, not all Muslim people believe that. Many millions don't, but it's still a major issue, and it's front and center of the problems facing Jews. So yeah, you bring up a good example when you describe what happened on Question Time, but that has been happening years and years.
By the way, guys, just wanted to say, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, like our video, comment, hype our videos. All these things really help us to grow, to get into the algorithm, and to continue to delivering videos, which I hope you will really appreciate. And I don't even say it's very nice to say that anymore, where we're united against hate, because if you're going to say all this stuff, which essentially is just trying to dull the crowd, dull the emotions, and ignore the problem, then you are part of the problem, because you're not addressing the problem. It's going to lead to more of this stuff, and you're creating a climate in which people feel unable to talk about this. Why is it that there's this unwillingness or fear of talking about these issues that exist specifically in the Islamic community?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I am very unforgiving when it comes to that sort of thing. I find that deliberate lack of honesty so jarring, and very disconcerting to watch the most powerful people in the country do it endlessly, especially.
Do you think they know what they're doing?
I think most of them do know what they're doing, because they are ideological. It's an ideological driven thing. It's ideologically driven. It's not something they just happen to do. They don't just randomly mutter platitudes which perfectly obfuscate the problem. They do it because they know that's the ideologically correct thing to do at that time. But many other people in wider society will understandably be taken in by that to some extent. If you turn on the news and you just hear people saying, there's this rise in anti-Semitism, it's really bad. And then you immediately hear a news report which tells you, the far right are really, really dangerous. They want to close the borders. And it's really bad for Muslim, it's really bad for immigrants in general. It's just it's creating this climate of intolerance. You probably think, well, putting two and two together, it must be these far right people who are very significantly responsible for this hatred I'm hearing so much about. But actually that being almost an inversion of the truth. That's not to say there aren't far right lunatics. There definitely are, but that's often not the cause when we're facing that sort of obfuscation. So yeah, it's interesting to see. In terms of why there is the obfuscation, it doesn't only apply. I kind of want to make clear at the beginning, because I've noticed that this is missing from a lot of the discussion of this issue, and I think it actually might be quite detrimental to Jews in some respect that it's not discussed in this way. This stuff doesn't only apply to anti-Semitic attacks; it also applies to all manner of Islamist attacks,
Sure.
forms of intolerance, Islamist intolerance, like even the rape gangs, jihadist terrorism. These issues have consistently been discussed with a certain playbook, which is after the attack, you generalize, like the liberal kind of establishment will try as hard as possible to divert focus from the specific issue of whether there are certain sections or certain currents within Islam which are intolerant and which are posing a threat to Western social life and the social fabric. And instead, they'll focus on anything and everything else, specifically Islamophobia, wherever possible. There are countless instances of them doing that, but also just like generalizing hate and the problem of people looking back in anger and anything else they can think of. So I remember after Sir David Amess was stabbed by an Islamist, I believe it's because he is
a British member of Parliament, for those who don't remember.
Yeah, that's right. He was brutally murdered by someone who disagreed with his viewpoint. I think he was a friend of the Conservative Friend of Israel. It might have been something to do with that.
Yeah.
There was like a session in Parliament where they discussed it, the MPs discussed it, and they stood up one after the other. Very few of them mentioned the elephant in the room. Instead, there was discussion of a general decline in civility in politics. It's like, no, it's not a general decline in civility. I mean, that may be an issue, but the issue is a certain faction of jihadists keep killing people. That is the issue here. And the Observer wrote an article saying that it's obnoxious to politicize the tragedy. It's like, well, would the Observer be politicizing the tragedy if a far-right person had just killed a left-wing MP? Which did happen. And of course they would, and it would be right to. You want to investigate the ideology behind these sort of attacks. So basically the reason that they do this stuff is because it completely runs counter to their ideological narrative. And so it's just an absolute necessity for them.
It would be like, if someone broke their leg and then you go to the doctor and they say, look, we all kinds of bones can be broken. So, let's just, put a cast around, I don't know, your whole body. Like it's just, or something bizarre like that just doesn't deal with a specific problem. Yes, racial problem can exist in, many different ideologies and segments, but there is a specific problem here that is disproportionately problematic. And I think something that's so helpful that you have done is highlight the statistics, the figures. You put out a post recently on your Instagram highlighting how 25% of British Muslims hold a favourable view of Hamas. I mean, by the way, you should know that it's hard to always... I wonder, are people honest when they speak to pollsters? They could get in trouble about if they may be considering, do I want to be saying something like this to a pollster? Because a Muslim friend of mine, actually, that comes from Bradford, told me he thinks that percentage is way, way higher of support for Hamas in his Muslim community. But you know that 15% hold a favourable of Al-Qaeda, 16% favourable to ISIS. And also just in terms for people to know, in the UK at least, London is now 15% Muslim, roughly 1.3 million people, and then you list some of the highest percentage Muslim areas. Can you just talk a bit more about these statistics and their implications?
Yeah, sure. Actually, sorry, I just wanted to correct one of the statistics I put in that post was incorrect. I said it was like 50% are in favor of violence in response to blasphemous behavior. It was actually, I think it's more like 25%, but yeah, the rest still stand. I was just checking it before I came on.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the significance of these statistics are, they're kind of helpful in the sense that it's not like I don't want to sound like I'm like throat clearing, but it's genuinely the case. It's not a comfortable conversation to have because everyone knows like really great people who they're friends with who are Muslim who don't believe this stuff, and like loads of people don't believe this stuff in the Muslim community. So you don't want to be making people in that community feel like you're tarring everyone with the same brush. But I do think to some extent these statistics are so stark, they really put it into perspective. Like 15% of the population of a city is Muslim, and roughly 1 in 6, according to this recent research, I mean, to the extent that it's in any way roughly accurate, have sympathy with ISIS. Now, ISIS is literally a jihadist death cult that is committed to the annihilation of the West and basically the conquering of this nation, and is engaged in the enslavement of infidels. It's just tried to wipe out the entire Yazidi people. It's been beheading people on beaches. It's the most brutal, most medieval outfit it's possible to imagine. And based on this research, a reasonable number of people you pass on the street in some of these areas might have quite a bit of sympathy for that outfit. Now, that is staggering, but not necessarily that surprising. Like, we know that a certain number, around like between 500 and 1,500 people, left Britain to join ISIS and different jihadist groups a while back at ISIS's peak. So you can extrapolate for that. There's probably a fair bit more support than the number of people who literally left. At one point, some people were claiming there was an equivalent number of British Muslims in the military as there were in ISIS and other jihadist groups. So this is a very, very significant social issue. It's almost as significant as it's possible to imagine an issue like that being. It's like finding out that 1 in 6 people in a group which contains millions of people believe that the Nazis are amazing, or like have very significant sympathy with the Nazis. That would be like a staggering thing to discover. So it's worth taking this very seriously. That's what I've tried to draw out in this debate. But it's not just limited to ISIS. Like, some people in that poll may not have stated they support ISIS, but still are in favor of the criminalization of blasphemous offenses, which I think was about 50% of the people polled. So that's millions of people who want to introduce blasphemy laws. Again, that's a very significant change from standard British ways of carrying out civic life. So yeah, it's not something we can just pass over. It has to be addressed. And for years, the establishment response to this stuff has just been to essentially bury it, deny it, or call anyone who discusses it racist. And the results we're now seeing on our streets. We've had multiple terror attacks. We've got openly sectarian voting in recent local elections. That will obviously only get more dramatic as the years go by, unless there's a change of course. And we've got Jews being stabbed like quite regularly, or synagogues being burnt, as in there are many synagogues burnt and different Jewish buildings burnt in a very small space of time recently. So this stuff is very serious. So it's worth discussing it honestly.
Do you buy into the rhetoric that, Britain could become a Muslim country, or do you think that's hyperbole?
I mean, I don't think it's likely to become majority Muslim in the immediate near future. And I also think that we have just on a sheer weight of numbers level, it's likely that we might change the immigration system, which would dramatically affect future outcomes. So if there's a much lower number of people coming into the country each year, that means the rate of change will slightly slow. But having said that, I do think that the birth rate in the Muslim community is far higher than the national average. And we do have a sizable portion of the population at the moment who are Muslim. So it will definitely become a sizable demographic. It will be a significant demographic change. We've already seen that that's changed dramatically in recent years. The other point is that you can have changes within the way that Islam is subscribed to. So it may be the case that there's greater integration in the UK. It may be the case that there's a firmer stamping out of the more Islamist elements within Islam in the West. That may easily happen. In recent months, it certainly hasn't seemed like that's the case as we've seen regular large marches featuring open jihadist displays of support for other jihadist outfits, jihadist chanting and stuff like that. But that could happen. But on the other hand, just as you can see from different Middle Eastern countries in the history of the whole region, that when a sizable percentage of the population starts voting and acting in a vaguely sectarian manner, that can still lead to major downstream consequences. Whether the country becomes taken over, I don't think that's likely. I just think that these are still going to be major issues.
How do we deal with the issue?
Oh, that's a good question. I think
it's the most important question, because we were hearing at the rally a few days ago, we need action. The time for talking is over. But how many people want to say what action? That's the thing that I think matters most here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just think, in terms of how I think about all political discussion, to be honest, the fundamental starting point for any rational discussion has to be honesty, just being free to say what one genuinely thinks to be the case and discussing objective realities truthfully. Without that, you're almost determining in advance that the outcomes will be irrational.
Sure.
That doesn't only apply to discussion of Islam or issues we're discussing here, sure, which is downstream of it. It applies to many issues. Like, this is one of the central characteristics of wokeness and progressive groupthink more broadly, is it basically ruthlessly clamps down on relatively anodyne discussion of social realities, because those pose a threat to the ideological worldview. But I would say an absolute starting point is honesty. I think another factor which would obviously be important is having a sense of self-confidence as a nation ourselves, which has been very significantly worn away at by kind of fluffy liberal groupthink and wokeness in general, more broadly, which is entirely built upon defaming the West, defaming Western societies, presenting everything in our society as constantly and embarrassingly oppressive, and us as responsible for that in some way. That encourages people who've come into this country who might not really have a strong view of it to think, oh yeah, I'm actually being oppressed here. This is a really oppressive society. I'm right to form a sectarian bloc and push back for my interests and stand against that oppression. And instead of our society essentially saying, no, look, you can come here and join the country, but you've got to adapt and you can't be going around killing people who offend you. We basically say, oh, it's so offensive here. We're so sorry that we've been so offensive. Well, that's the kind of messaging we give out. And I think that actually emboldens worse traits within certain Islamist movements, for example. Like you can see, for example, in certain Muslim countries, they've actually recently adopted a much harder line approach on Islamism than we have in Britain. So to some extent, I mean, I don't know how much of I don't really think that's going to solve the problem there dramatically, but it's definitely a better approach than we take here.
For decades, one idea has shaped how much of the world understands the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel did something wrong, and the Palestinians simply resisted. Whether it's 1948 or the recent war in Gaza, the story is the same every time. Israel provokes, Palestinians resist. Israel oppresses, Palestinians fight back. This narrative dominates campuses, the media, and much of global politics. It feels familiar, it feels intuitive, and for many people, it feels true. But what if the sequence is backwards? What if the origin point and every major chapter that followed has been told in reverse? In the wars of 1948 and 67, in the collapse of Oslo, in the suicide bombings of the Intifada, in the rockets after Israel withdrew from Gaza, in the massacre of October 7th, and the global narrative that followed. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to expose the great lie that has reversed cause and effect, a narrative engineered to help the real aggressors erode Israel's legitimacy. We'll trace the conflict from its origins to the present day, revealing how at every stage the true sequence of events was inverted, how aggression was reframed as resistance, how defense was recast as provocation, and how a conflict rooted in hatred of Jews was deliberately twisted into a story that blames the Jews. Join us as we restore the story to the order in which it actually happened and uncover the truth hidden beneath a century of lies. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description. Yeah, absolutely. I think once morale is, improved among the British population, and also a sense that we actually have standards in society. We have standards for what's acceptable. Right now, I think the Islamists and Marxists, whatever, they think they can just run riot over Britain because they feel like we just don't really have any self-belief, self-confidence, and basic standards in society. And one of the ways in which that flows into something real is that Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, has said that the hate marches need to be banned, the anti-Israel march that have been happening every single week. You wrote an article about it saying that Kemi gets it. I just interviewed Melanie Phillips last week, and she believes that. She says, let's stop. People say this is not pro-Palestinian, it's actually anti-Israel. She says, no, it's not even anti-Israel. It's Islamist. It's an Islamist march. Do you agree with Melanie's assessment, and do you agree with Kemi's proposal?
To be honest, I agree with Melanie's assessment, and I actually really like Kemi Badenoch. I thought Kemi Badenoch's speech was really great. I think it's like one of the best things I've seen in response to the attacks recently on Jews. But when it comes to banning the marches, to be honest, I am instinctively very liberal in the traditional sense that I really don't like any restrictions on free speech whatsoever. I'm almost like an absolutist in that respect, kind of in line with my point about maximum honesty and maximum truthfulness leading to good outcomes. So as far as humanly possible, I would prefer not to clamp down on opinions I disagree with. That's my instinct. The specifics of the marches, it does get a bit complicated because you could say that people are actually inciting violence, which once you get to that point, I think it becomes a different debate. But fundamentally, my instinct is a liberal one. As in, there's loads of people who are really horrified by discussion online since Elon Musk freed up Twitter, but I was massively in favor of that. And I still think that, yeah, obviously it's led to some complete lunatics gaining huge followings. But on the other hand, it's also allowed people saying good stuff who are getting censored to say things which they have a right to say. So not that I think there's anyone saying anything particularly worth hearing on these marches, but I'm disinclined to censor people as far as humanly possible. And in terms of Melanie Phillips' assessment, I actually agree. I think fundamentally this isn't really a pro-Palestine, pro-Israel debate. I think that's a smaller issue, which a lot of people are kind of missing. It's a smaller issue within a wider global ideological debate fundamentally being waged by Islamists, Islamic sectarianists, and other people of that persuasion, as well as kind of anti-civilizational leftists and progressives against the West and our institutions, which they see as being embodied by Israel, but also against Jews. Like not necessarily the leftists, but definitely the Islamists just are waging war essentially against Jews, and the leftists just completely fall for that.
Yeah. I'm like you. I'm also instinctively against, want to have maximum free speech. However, I do actually believe it's right to ban the hate marches because, we have limits when it comes to incitement. And in my view, these marches, I mean, I know a lot of people would balk at this, but I personally consider the Palestinian flag not to have much meaningful difference to a swastika. But, I wish it were the case that they genuinely were just concerned with human rights and well-being, but they're not. And they've proven that what they're about is just killing Jews and removing Jewish people's right to live. And the other point that I think is really worth sitting on, and as you say, this applies to more than just Israel and Jews, is that we have to be very careful not to let the Islamists take advantage of Western freedoms to destroy it. There's got to be a serious, but I recognize that, the slippery slope concern, but there's also the concern that they end up actually using all of this, the wonders of the West in order to destroy it. And that needs to be given a lot of thought. So I guess lastly, I just want to know from you is what are you kind of raising the flag? What topic are you raising the flag about at the moment? Like, what do you think people aren't talking about enough?
A lot of things. Like definitely what we've been discussing now, just radical honesty about all the issues which we've downstream of the massive, unprecedented spread of Islam, and then all the consequences of that, the negative consequences which aren't discussed. For example, jihadism, just honesty about what's going on and how to deal with it. I think that's definitely one of them. I think wokeness gets a lot of attention, but I think is a huge issue which people are still kind of nervous to push back against. But more specifically than wokeness, which to be fair is kind of acceptable to critique now that a bit of time has passed, I still think that the underlying ideas and currents within that thinking are embedded in so much of our mainstream establishment and mainstream media and academic institutions. So I think it's worth thinking about the fact that the fundamentally misplaced ideas are still incredibly influential and need to be rooted out. Well, not rooted out, but just, they need to be understood for what they are rather than papered over or not addressed properly. So I think those are two big issues that I'm interested in, but there are many others.
Fascinating. I have to ask one more as well, just before we finish as well, which is I was talking to Danny Bourmawi. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote a book called Islam, Israel and the West. He's left Islam. He was grew up in Jordan, now lives in America. And his view is that the radicals are the ones that are being true to the text of the Quran. He says they're a minority, even that's still millions of people, but they're the ones that are being true to the text of the Quran. Just wondered from your assessment analysis, do you agree with that?
I mean, my instinct is just to look at what's actually going on in the name of the religion globally and address those consequences. I don't know. I have a feeling that you could find bad and good interpretations of almost any religious text. I'm Jewish, but I'm not religious at all, so I'm not deeply into the theology behind all this different stuff. But I think you could make a case that that's in the grand sweep of history, would more of the Muslims who've existed have been in favor of the things that the moderates in the West are in favor of, or would they have been in favor of the things that the hardliners across the Muslim world are in favor of? Presumably the latter, but I don't know. I don't think that necessarily matters if the religion can be changed to the extent that it can. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. It doesn't seem to have happened very successfully globally so far, but it may be possible. So I tend, instead of getting stuck down into like the specifics of the textual analysis, I just think, look, what's going on in these regions? Are there vast groups of people massacring people in the name of a religion in different regions? Yes. If so, what's the religious motivation there? Okay, then we should be able to discuss that freely. That's kind of my general approach. I don't want to be laying the law down saying that it will never change, but I think fundamentally we have to at least begin by being honest in how we approach this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it matters because, like, if someone, you know, let's say you have some kind of, let's say you had a Jewish terrorist or something, even though you just almost never see that, that, you know, does something in the name of the Torah or the Talmud or something, and then you'll find, okay, is there much of a tradition for this? Is there a halachic? Is there a legal? And you'll see there's nothing there for that. But if, as Danny was arguing, actually there's a strong legalistic Sharia-based justification for what ISIS, etc., are doing, then I think you've got a much more serious problem on your hands, at least in terms of actually needing to look at the religion itself. And I ask it because I feel like ultimately we need to have all the points you raise, upping our standards in society, taking much more seriously the ideology, security concerns. But fundamentally as well, I do believe that the root of this has to be a serious look at the actual religion and the ideology and the texts, if they are indeed playing a pivotal role in inspiring this kind of insanity. But Max, look, thank you so much for everything you're doing. I'll put a link to your Substack in the video description below, and let's have future conversations as well, because you've clearly got your finger on the pulse. Something remarkable is happening. For decades, the world told us the problem was Zionism, occupation, international law. But lately, the mask is slipping. Muhammad Hijab, millions of followers, said in his own words,
"It's not just Zionism, it's Judaism as well. They believe they are superior to you."
Tucker Carlson from the other direction keeps insisting, sorry, but the Jews are not the chosen people.
That there is no chosen people. The chosen people are people who choose Jesus.
Notice what both of these people, coming from completely opposite worlds, have in common. They're not talking about 1948. They're not talking about land. They're not even talking about Israel. They're talking about Jewish chosenness. And here's what blows my mind. This is not a modern argument. This argument is as old as the first two brothers who ever lived, Cain and Abel. God chooses one offering, not the other, and instead of learning from his brother, Cain kills him. The blueprint is right there at the very start, and it plays out again with Ishmael and Isaac. The roots of the Islamic world's relationship with the Jewish people. And with Esau and Jacob, the roots of the Christian Wests. The two great fault lines of Jewish history. And both of them begin not on a battlefield, but in a nursery. And here's what's extraordinary. The rabbis of the Talmud, thousands of years ago, summarized this whole phenomenon in just one sentence. Hatred, Sina, comes from Sinai. Sina is Hebrew for hatred. From the moment the Jewish people formalized their covenant with God at Mount Sinai, the world's resentment was ignited. In this JTV documentary, we're going all the way back. Back to the very first fracture in human history. Back to the first act of violence ever recorded. Because when you understand that moment, you understand anti-Semitism completely, where it truly comes from, why facts and arguments alone will never be enough to defeat it, but most importantly, what the Torah has always known about how to finally heal it. Because for the first time, we're not just diagnosing the world's oldest disease, we're finding the cure. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.